Hey everybody, you are here with me and Tierney's lovely headshot for Real Talk, where we will be talking about Pro-Heaux Theology, Pro-Heaux Part Deux, Pro-Heaux Part Deux, as it looks on the flyer. So happy to be here. How are you, Tierney? What are you up to?
I am doing well. I am getting my hair done because I forgot that I signed up to do this at the same time that I signed up to get my hair done. So here we are, being great and multitasking and talking about all of the things that are important to me.
We love to see it. Can you give America a preview of what kind of hairdo you're getting today?
No.
Okay.
You mean like a visual preview or like a word?
No, like a description.
Oh, okay, I can do that.
I was like, damn.
So if you know anything about Black girls and their hair, when you get braids, sometimes once they've grown out a little bit, you want to get your edges redone. And so
Okay.
I'm getting my edges redone on my twists so that they appear new, even though they are not.
Well, I cannot wait to see it. So for those of y'all that just joined, we've got, she said, no, she sure did. Hi, Chrissy. Nice to see you. So for those of y'all, yes, edges. For those of y'all who are just joining, Tierney is getting her hair done, which is why we are graced only with her profile photo. But we're here. You get to look at my disheveled self. And we're here to talk about Pro-Heaux Theology Part Deux. So for those of y'all who follow us on Holy Smokes and follow that podcast, we talked about this a week ago, as it was the subject of that episode called Pro-Heaux Theology. It's a thing. And just because I think it's such a fascinating topic, and also I think it's such an important one, just wanted to give Tierney primarily a platform to talk about it some more, but then really just to talk about how this womanist inspired, invented theology can be meaningful to people who don't fall within that category as well, such as myself. So if you don't have any other questions, those in the live audience out there, let us know if you're here. We'll go on ahead. So Tierney, what would you say to somebody who doesn't know what Pro-Heaux theology is, which I would imagine is a lot of people?
Yes. Okay. So to give an overview of Pro-Heaux theology, so it stems from a feminist and a womanist lens and praxis as an approach to theology. And so for some feminists, Pro-Heaux theology is only pro-sex work. So they're saying that pro-sex work is okay and would not be condemned by God. And for me, as someone who identifies as a womanist, I ascribe to a broader definition of pro-Heaux theology that does not just say pro-sex work. It says pro, as I said in the podcast, do whatever your grown consenting self want to do with other grown consenting adults. But just saying that if it's consent, if consent is on both sides, and all parties involved, then you can engage in sexual relationships with whomever and however many people you want to, and that is not something that is condemned by God, as long as the consent part is met. And so, to talk a little bit about womanism and feminism and the difference between those two, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Most people are pretty familiar with what feminism is. And so feminism has a history of being racist towards Black women because sometimes white women have a tendency to censor their whiteness over their gender. And so they are oppressive to women of color in the fight for feminism. And so womanism is for us, by us. So it is Black women who are fighting against sexism, racism, and classism. And it's fighting for the same major and ultimate goals of feminism, but it's doing so in a way that is created for us and by us, and that doesn't necessarily have to work inside the system of feminism as it has created its own system. So ultimately, the goals and the desires are very much similar and sometimes the same, but it's basically like a systemic thing. So it's like, do I want to fight inside the system of feminism as some Black feminists do, or do I want to fight in the system, from the system and the lens of womanism?
Beautiful.
I think that answers the question.
No, I think you did. I have some follow-up questions though. So I want to start with womanism. When roughly did womanism become a thing? Like the who's, the what's, the when's, all of that.
Okay, yeah. So the term womanist was coined by Alice Walker in 1983 in her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And so she is the first person who ever used the word womanist. She coined that phrase. And if you haven't had a chance to look up her definition, you should look it up. It's beautiful. It's 4 parts. It's not academic. It's very relatable. It's very lived experience. It's very poetic. One of my favorite parts of it is where it says that womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender, which kind of speaks to that point of we're fighting the same fight. We're just doing it a little bit differently. And so, and then womanism has been, it's not just applied to theology. So it often started in theological conversations, but womanists are engaging all areas of academia. They're engaging all types of church spaces, even outside the academy. And so it's something that was created for us and by us, and is showing up in all areas of study.
I love it. Could I be a womanist?
No. So in order to be a womanist, you have to be a Black woman. And so men and women who are not Black can be allies of womanism, and they can be like our womanist cousins and our womanist brethren, and people who are committed to seeking justice the same as we are, but they cannot identify themselves as a womanist. As I was saying earlier, this is a space that's for us and by us and for Black women.
So why is it then that a man could, and I know there's debate on this, but it's more accepted within feminism for people who don't identify as women to call themselves feminists. Like I can call myself a feminist. Why is it that womanism is more contextual and does have that requirement?
I think that it kind of speaks a little bit to the safe space, the space that we have created for ourselves, and not allowing people to come in and to co-opt that space. And so I think that by having a space that centers us and that affirms us in that unique way, just speaks to it being a place that is safe for us. And of course, that doesn't that's not a foolproof answer, because sometimes women can not be safe towards one another, which is not the ideal, which is not the goal, but sometimes that does happen. And so, not saying that that is foolproof and that nobody will ever get hurt based on a womanist conversation, or a womanist will never do anything to like offend them or anything like that. But I think that the reason that it's for us and by us is to eliminate that ability for it to be co-opted or taken over by somebody else.
I love it. So going back to the Pro-Heaux specifically, so is Pro-Heaux theology more so about praxis, which is the academic fancy word for the stuff that you do, or is it more about like an identity, a posture? Because in your description of it, you focus mostly on sex work, consent, and doing adult things with your adult bodies with other adult bodies that say it's okay. So is it more so about like the specific actions, or is it that and an identity question?
I think it's both and so
Okay.
a little bit about what I said in the podcast too about the definition of hoe and the reclaiming of the word hoe. And so when we use that terminology as it relates to pro-Heaux theology, it's not used in a negative connotation. So calling yourself a hoe does not have a negative connotation, and it's also a word that you assign for yourself. It's something you claim for yourself, similar to feminist and womanist. These are not things that other people can like label for you. This is a
Mm,
word that you claim for yourself. And so I think that when we look at it from that perspective of this is something that I named myself, I'm taking agency over my actions, I'm taking agency over my body, and you don't have control over it, I do. And so it speaks
mm.
a little bit to the embodiment of it and the praxis of it, I think.
Thank
Does that
you.
answer your
Awesome.
question?
It does.
Okay.
So, hoe, I guess here, I'll start with this question. How would you say hoe, besides a gardening tool, we made that joke last week and we're still recovering from it, apart from this feminist, womanist reclaiming of the word, what would you say is the like quote unquote traditional definition of hoe?
I think that the traditional understanding of it is someone who's loose, someone who engages in casual sex with multiple people, sometimes for money, sometimes not for money. And just like if I think about it from like a generational or a stereotypical standpoint, is somebody who's out here doing all of the things with whomever they want to do them with, and it's kind of and it has that negative
Mm-hmm.
stereotype of you not being able to like you're not committing to whatever relationship it is you want to be in. You just out here like as people say living your life or having fun and things. And so
Right.
someone who's
Sowing
loose,
your
someone
wild
who's
oats.
free. Yeah, on your wild. So the things that men get praised for, you call it for.
Got it. So if that's the case, and if it's somebody who's loose, sexual partners, all those things you said, men, people who identify as men, people who are on whatever end of the spectrum is not woman, can be hoes. Why does it matter that it's women specifically using that word in a reclaimed fashion and in a way to construct a theology?
Okay, that's a great question. So men being promiscuous or loose doesn't have a negative connotation. And if they're doing it, they don't get called a hoe. They get called a player. They get dapped up. They're like, hey, you doing your thing. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're doing what men do, blah, blah, blah. And so for them, this has never come with a negative stereotype or a negative connotation. It wasn't used to label them or degrade them or minimize them in any way. And so since we live in a patriarchal society, it has been done that way for women, and being able to be free and to be sexually liberated has not been something that women are supposed to do based on our socialization. And so
Mhm.
for the reclamation of this word, the reason it's so important for women is because that's who it's been most used to harm. So the concept of hoe, if you think about it from a traditional standpoint, doesn't even apply to men. It only
Mm,
applies to women because men could just be out here doing whatever it is they want to do, and people are going to applaud them for that. Like they're getting it out of their system before they
right.
decide to commit to something, as opposed to just living their lives and engaging in whatever they want to do. And so they didn't have that negative stereotype or connotation to it when it did, which is why the reclamation of the word is so important.
Gotcha. So why does it matter then that it's Black women particularly? Because I would imagine there's even different applications, implications of that word specifically for Black women than certainly for white women, but even other women of color. And it looks like we might have lost Tierney. So I will continue. Oh, there you are.
Wait, I'm still here. I'm still here. I didn't hear the end of your question though.
Okay, so the end of my question was, so you just beautifully let us know why it matters that women are reclaiming the word hoe, and why it wouldn't matter and doesn't matter if men are called hoe or trying to reclaim that word, so that would be pointless. So why does it matter even more specifically that it is Black women who are taking this word and turning it into something constructive?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that it's not only Black women reclaiming the word. It is pro-Hoism or pro-Houx theology is something that is also occurring in feminist spaces and white feminist
Okay.
spaces. So just, add that nuance there. But I think that, to answer your question, I think that it's specifically important for Black women just in the ways that our bodies have been sexualized, the way that our bodies have been commodified, as we think through sex work, as we think through the way people engage and look at Black women, and the going even back to slavery, from the
Right.
over sexualization of our bodies at an early age. I think that being sexually liberated and reclaiming these terms and altering the perspectives from which we engage them and shifting our lens and our frameworks is so important, just based on that history and that entire the lineage of the quote unquote standard and stereotypical viewpoints.
Right. So you, as a Black woman, how has Pro-Heaux theology been liberating for you? Especially, you're a Black woman and you're married, monogamous, as far as I know. I mean, I don't know what goes on at the Reggie Tierney house, but as far as I know, monogamous. So seeing that you aren't, at least I don't know you to be what traditionally has been described as a hoe. How is it then that Pro-Heaux theology is still meaningful and liberative to you?
Relationship with my husband, and so I would
Can
say,
you start your answer? You kind of hopped out there for a second.
okay, hold on 1 second. Let me switch something and see if it fixes it.
Okay. So while Tierney's doing that, we are going to, after this question, we're going to shift to actually, I guess I'll go ahead and start now. So we're talking about this theology, Pro-Heaux theology, that is by and for women. But in the lineage of academic theory, right? So in the lineage of, feminist theory to womanist theory to eventually queer theory, which is where I come in as a gay man, as a gay Christian man, we see that you wouldn't have queer theory if it weren't for feminist and womanist theory. You wouldn't really have how we have received these lines of questioning that really call into question the structures of gender, that really call into question the structures of sexuality, and how these two things relate to one another, how they construct society, how they create norms and narratives that people adhere to, defy. The term in academic circles is, I kid you not, gender fucking. That's a technical term, so you can't get mad at me. But where I enter into this as a gay Christian man is that my sexuality is sort of flipped on its head because of the gender and or the sex to which it is oriented. So Tierney was talking earlier about how men can do whatever with whomever, however long they like, although let's be honest, probably not that long. But as long as they're able to, with as many women as they want to. And Hoe doesn't exactly apply to them. But I would say that doesn't hold true as much with queer men, men who have sex with men, because our sexuality is hoe-ish. It is outside the bounds of what is considered acceptable, normal sexuality, just by virtue of its existence. So even before a queer man, a man who has sex with men, engages in sex, he is deemed as a hoe, and we're going to get back to that more. So there's a little preview for you because Tierney has rejoined the stream. Hi, Tierney.
Hi, sorry about that. Technical difficulties.
That is okay. I just gave him a little taste of where the conversation is going. So now that you're back, the question was, why is it that Pro-Heaux theology is liberative and meaningful to you as somebody who, in some ways, would not fit into what the traditional definition of Pro is?
Yes, that's a great question. So for me, I try to work on being the best ally that I can and acknowledging my blind spots and also learning more about things that don't necessarily apply to me, but apply to the broader audience and people that I care about. And so in an attempt to do that and be a good ally, these are the types of things that I like to study and to be like knowledgeable about so that I can stand up for people whose life and lived experience are different than mine, because sometimes it's easier to speak up and speak out and speak against things that don't specifically apply to you because it doesn't like labor you in the same way. And so that's kind of where my desire to learn more about this came from, and just my desire as a whole to be a better ally for other marginalized groups of people.
That's beautiful. So who do you think would fall under a category of marginalization, minoritization, who would stand to be liberated by Pro-Heaux theology? Like who exactly would it be that you're standing up for in learning more about and advocating for Pro-Heaux theology?
People who engage in sex work, people who are not in monogamous relationships, people who are sexually liberated in a way that they have multiple partners, people who are queer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So what would you say to somebody, and I'm not that somebody, but what would you say to somebody who would clap back at that and say, well, you know, sex workers, they're making that choice, and people who are in non-monogamous relationships, like they just need to choose better. They're not being oppressed, they're just making mistakes. Like, what would you say that's PG rated to somebody who might retort with that, since these are sort of, you know, on the fringes conversations that I think are becoming more mainstream. But how is it that these folks are actually oppressed and not simply just making, you know, out of the bounds choices?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, but I would do my best to answer it. So I would push back and say that everyone who engages in sex work isn't doing it from a position of choosing to.
Okay.
And so I'll just leave that there. And then for people who are not in monogamous relationships, I don't think that that has to necessarily be a choice as well. I think that it could be, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that for some people, polyamory, polygamy, those different types of things might not necessarily be a choice. And I think you have to engage in those conversations on a case by case basis, because this isn't monolithic. So like everyone isn't going to fit into a nice category or a nice box as it relates to their sexuality and the way in which they express it and the people that they want to have sex with. And so I think that it's a case by case situation, but I also think that if people would mind the business that pays them, then, you know, this would be a lot easier.
So much would be so much easier. We wouldn't be talking here today. We'd probably be sipping a Mai Tai somewhere. I guess in my case, it'd be a mojito. That's my like beach drink of choice. What's yours?
Margarita is my drink of choice, no matter the location.
So at a Christmas party, you're rolling up and you're like, get the eggnog out of here. I want a Mary the Virgin margarita.
No, I don't like eggnog. If it's Christmas, just make my margarita red. You know.
Duly noted. So, dang, I had a question, but then I started talking about alcohol. It's very on brand.
We're talking about people minding the business that pays them, if that helps you remember your question.
That does help me remember my question, yes. So how, thinking about the question of allyship, so you were talking about being an ally to people And you went through that list of people that Pro-Heaux Theology can seek to liberate, or at the very least help survive. How can a non-Black, non-woman person, so like me, be an ally to womanists and womanism without, infringing on the very necessary boundaries that have been established?
Right, and I don't think you have to label yourself a womanist to do the work of womanism, because that would
Okay.
completely defeat the purpose of us not being, of people who are not Black women being able to allow themselves to name themselves that way. So I don't think you have to be a womanist to do the work of womanism. And so I think that the quickest answer for how to show up in allyship is starting by, if you see something, say something. So oftentimes, if there's conversations going on around you, if you see someone on social media that's saying something that's racist, sexist, or classist, and you have the bandwidth to engage them in a conversation, do so. Sometimes people's arrogance is on display and very loud, and some people are speaking from a place where they don't know any better, and some people are speaking from a place where they just don't care to learn any different. And so, of course, you need to acknowledge the difference and engage conversations with different people in different ways. But I think that starting with, if you see something, say something, is a great way to show up in your allyship. But that will require that you know what you're talking about. So you would have to have done the research in order to be able to back up your arguments, because we don't want you out here, saying things that don't make any sense or don't actually pertain to the argument at hand, and then that just makes everybody look bad.
Right. And then the people who are being problematic will just have the upper hand by virtue of them being trolls.
Correct.
Yes. That's very helpful. I remember last semester, you and I at Mercer University's McAfee School of Theology, Cecil B. Day Graduate Professional Campus in Atlanta, Georgia, took Dr. Angela Parker's Womanist, Feminist, Queer, Biblical Hermeneutics class together. Say what?
Oh, can you say that again? I didn't hear you, but I guess it was me because you were still talking.
No, I was just listing the fact that we were in a class on our campus. So I just said our Womanist, Feminist, Queer, Biblical Hermeneutics class. And I remember one of the questions I had showing up to that class, literally showing up, was I wasn't the only white person, but I was the only man-identified, male-bodied person in that class. And so I really had to figure out in real time what it is to be somebody showing up to a space that is not for me or by me, except for the queer part, which I think was not the dominant culture, obviously. And so, yeah, for those who are watching who might have that question as well, it is a journey, and it is a showing up, and it is a asking questions and being willing to be wrong, as long as there's also a willingness to learn from and improve upon whatever it is that was done wrong. But that's not what we're talking about here today. But I am curious to hear how Pro-Heaux theology is a theology, because obviously theology in its crudest form is God talk. So we've been talking a lot about, I guess, the world now, the world we live in, the here and now, about who this liberates, and that is God work. But specifically it being a theology and not simply, a theory for social transformation, how is it that this Pro-Heauxism speaks of God, frames God, connects us to God, all of that good God stuff?
So I would start by saying that it allows us to engage in conversation with God and about God, that from the perspective that being a hoe and being pro-hoe is not something that will be condemned by God. It's not something that God would look badly on. And so that shifts your framework for how you engage with other people and how you also engage in conversation with the divine. But I really want to listen to you explain again the concept of how God could be perceived as a hoe, which I thought you did so eloquently on the podcast episode.
So you're just going to put me on the spot here. I'm not even getting my hair done.
Yes.
I guess I could just mess it up a little bit. So I'm trying to remember what I said, because a lot of that was in the moment on the spot. But I think the gist of what I said was first based off of a comment left in our virtual audience on the podcast episode. For those of y'all who are watching now or later for this Real Talk episode, if you want to see live podcast recordings of our Holy Smokes Cigars and Spirituality podcast, you can join our Patreon group for a small donation of $5 per month and be able to participate and suggest episode titles and get all sorts of special things. So we were doing that, and one of our Patreon members put in the chat, what if God is a hoe? So moving it from does God bless this to is God is this? Does God identify as this? And my immediate thought was yes. And why I think that is because, for one, a hoe is basically somebody who is someone who has embraced their sexuality, whatever that is, however that looks, and has found the fertile ground of it to be life-giving. It's not simply, I have dirt, or that is dirt, but there is soil within me that can produce life, that is unique to me, and that allows me to then, assuming you are allosexual, which is the opposite of asexual, so you tend to have sexual desire and engage with sex with other people on a semi-regular basis, unless you've been stuck in quarantine for the last year, not to name names, me. But assuming that you have sex with other people and that is how you express your sexuality, sex is that which allows you to love other people as God loves us, which is out of body. It's ecstasy. There's a reason why we say, oh God, at climax. And it's not simply because it feels good. It's because it really is an example of when your pleasure, not you, Tierney, obviously, but the royal you, when your pleasure and my pleasure are so codependent, not in a healthy sense, interdependent, that's a better word, interdependent on one another, that I derive pleasure from my partner's pleasure and my partner's pleasure derives pleasure from mine. And we get to love somebody both fully within and fully without of our body, becoming one flesh, but then having our separate uniquenesses intact as well. So if that is how we love other people because of our sexualities, then that is how the Trinity works, right? It is three entities who are mutually upholding one another, who are, giving and taking, being submissive, being dominant, topping, bottoming, however you want to call it, so that each entity retains its fundamental character and its uniqueness in the service of the unique character of the other entities, the Father or the Mother or the Parent, the Son, the Christ, the Holy Spirit. And so when you have this Trinitarian example of what good sex is, you know it when you've had it and you know it when you've not had it. At least I know. There's a very clear difference. Then you think about, okay, so this God who had within God's own self this relationship, this triune, three-pronged, menage a trois relationship, then said, but this still isn't good enough. So then God created, spoke, just as we do at climax and say, oh God, the word became flesh. God spoke into existence relational creation. And the means by which that happens is molecules being attracted to one another. And at that point, that they retain their uniquenesses, molecular bonds, that then create more things. That is nothing if not sex, albeit done in a very different way. So I think God, being the father, mother, parent of all, being the source of life, that to me sounds like a baby daddy with lots and lots and lots and lots of kids, or a sperm donor with lots and lots and lots of kids, and who then set up the systems of the world so that they could replicate that creation, that creational impulse, through relationality and through coming together and through being a hoe, through having a sexual desire and a need not simply to create, but then also to recreate. So I think we might have lost you again. I can keep talking. So essentially,
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry. I just heard the background noise fade off. So that's essentially, I think, the gist of what I said on last week's episode. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, and I think that if we even get into the conversation of like pleasure and how all pleasure
Yes.
isn't sexual, and how it can be but it doesn't have to be, and you know how sex isn't only for procreation, like the nuances to that conversation and the concept of God being a hoe, as we think critically through all of those parts, I think can really really, I don't know, I just feel like it'd be a really juicy conversation and thought process, even though it's jarring for most people because we
Right.
still have that negative connotation of the word hoe. So it feels like, ooh, calling God a hoe, I can't do that, that's so bad. But if you take that stigma off of it and really like think about it from a different perspective, I think it opens it up to a lot of different possibilities.
Absolutely. And that then segues into the conversation, which we don't have a lot of time for, but for queer sexuality, for me, I apart from very expensive scientific revelations and miracles, can't have sex for procreation, which is historically an argument against queer sexuality, regardless of gender involved. So yeah, to open up the conversation of pro-Heaux, even though it is rooted in feminism, womanism, and is for and by women, necessarily that involves trans people who are trans women are women. But then that also, for queer people such as myself to reclaim our sexualities apart from even having sex, but reclaiming our sexual orientations and identities and alities as good as, if this is outside the bounds of heteronormativity and respectability, then if that's a hoe, then I guess a hoe isn't a bad thing because I'm not a bad thing. So I think it's a beautiful example of how womanism, feminism, queer, and certainly all movements, theories are interdependent on one another. But as it pertains to gender and sexuality specifically, I think it's a really beautiful model of how I have to be. I don't see it even as like maybe I will choose, if I have an off day, I have to be an ally to, or try to be an ally to womanists, feminists, Black feminists, New Javista, Chicano theologians, all these woman theologians of color, because my liberation and the theories that have helped me love myself better are the direct product of the Tierney Jordans of the world and the Angela Parkers and Shamika Walker Barnes of the world. And for me to not ally myself and fight for them means that I'm once again just taking without paying proper respect or giving credit. Does that resonate with you? I've been rambling, but does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I completely understand that. And I've as we think about the way things grow and evolve and the intersectionalities of our intersectionalities and just the things that we don't even think about that contribute to our humanity and our privileges and our words are escaping me. What is the opposite of privilege?
Oppression?
Yes, thank you. And so all of the ways that those things work together, it's a journey, and it's growing, and that's why the field is always changing and evolving. So we wouldn't be having conversations about feminism, womanism, or queer theology 50, 70, 100 years ago in this same way. And so as we continue to have these conversations, as we continue to engage in this dialogue, it just opens it up to continuing to grow and expand the field as they all are in conversation with one another.
Absolutely, I love it. So where do you think, as a on the rise womanist scholar whose star is surely rising, where do you see womanism heading? Where do you see that conversation evolving at this point in history?
The people would say that we are on the cusp of a fourth wave of womanism, which is a little bit of what I'm writing about in my thesis that I'm writing at McAfee. And so thinking about the intentional intersectionality and the intentional inclusivity that is womanist, and thinking through the ways in which we are incorporating African indigenous religions and a broader spiritual framework into the way we engage our Christianity, and then also just thinking through the asking of different, continuing to ask those different questions at more deeper levels. So we've written like the foundational text, we've written the those types of things, but nuancing those conversations and engaging in them in a deeper and broader way, continuing to expand the field and the study.
Where do you see yourself in all that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I see myself as a womanist preacher. I see myself as a womanist theologian. In the work that I do, I wanted to transcend theology and religion and culture. So I wanted to be these theological and spiritual conversations that are happening both inside and outside of the church in a way that affects in a way that integrates your WAPs, in a way that integrates your hotels, in a way that integrates pop culture and the lived experiences of Black women each and every day outside of the academic and theological discourse.
That was a good elevator pitch. Have you practiced that?
No, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it and remember what I said, because it kind of just flowed.
Right, you might have to get your voice memos app out and record that.
Yes.
It can be on Hotels Part 2. It can be one of the intermissions between the songs.
Yes, I like
story. We'll have to call Jasmine Sullivan up. You know, she's a big fan of TFC. We've got her on.
You know, I'm just gonna have to, you know, get one of my own tales so I can talk, you know.
Right. So we've got about 3 minutes left. These tend to run about 45 minutes. So if anyone who's watching this now or later has any questions, now's your chance to put them in the chat. But barring that, seeing as we are drawing to a close, is there anything else about womanism, Pro-Heaux Theology, Tierney Jordan, future MDiv, PhD extraordinaire? Is there anything that you feel like we didn't adequately cover that you want to address?
I don't think that there's anything that we didn't adequately cover. I just want to, you know, add nuance to the conversation. So this is a growing field. This is a new field of study. And so it's not that we're going to have, you know, all the answers. We're learning and growing and discovering together. And so being open to push back, being open to critique, being open to say, I don't know, let me figure that out. If these are the types of conversations that interest you, being open to that, but also being open to the journey and to the evolution of changing your mind, discovering new thoughts. And so it's growing, it's changing. You don't have the book or the manuscript already written. You get to do the hard work of figuring it out, which is hard and fun all at the same time. But yeah, I think that's only one I would add to the conversation, is that this is an emerging field of study, and as we learn and grow, the answers will also learn and grow and change.
Amen. And all God's people said, amen. What are you watching right now? What's your show of choice? Hello?
Oh dang, what's that show on Netflix called? It's about these two women who've been friends since they were kids. Can you hear me?
Yes. Two women friends since they were
Is it
kids.
lagging? Oh, okay. So there's a show on Netflix that has these two women who've known each other. Who's to say? I, The Good Witch, which was on Hallmark, and so yes, now I'm watching this new show.
I love it. I am watching, as I've been telling everybody, Cosby Show all the way through, and I'm loving it. But that's nothing new. You don't need to really tell people what that is. But anyway, we have been Tierney Jordan and Grayson Hester. Anyway, she is the producer. What's your official title at TFC? Tierney? Anywho, she and I both work at TFC. We're both in our final semesters at McAfee School of
I think
Theology.
I muted myself by accident.
Oh no, that's all right. I'm just doing the goodbyes. So if you've liked what you've seen today, feel free to tune in every third Thursday at this time, 7:30 p.m. EST for Real Talk. Who knows who will be on next month and what they'll be talking about it, but we do know it'll be real. But every other Thursday at the same time is I Just Need a Minute, hosted by various members of the TFC community, where we offer an inspiring word, we do some meditation, we lead a prayer, just something, to help us get through what continue to be very hard times. And sometimes all we need is a minute just to breathe. And so that's what we intend to provide y'all on Thursdays, except for the third Thursday, which is Real Talk. This Saturday, we have our final installment of the Breaking All the Rules series. So we're just going to be talking about Christian Smith, our pastor's new book. In retrospect, we've been through every chapter for the past 11 or so weeks. And we're just going to answer any lingering questions you may have and just, put a cap on it and literally close the book on this series. So see y'all there at 4:00 p.m. EST on Zoom. You can go to our Facebook page or our Instagram under our link tree and find that link. And then this Sunday at 7:00 p.m. EST, we're going to be watching Love, Simon for our virtual watch party for February. One of my personal favorite movies ever, so I'm really excited about that. That will be on our Faith and Film Connection Group Facebook page, or Facebook group. Also, you can find that on our Facebook or our Instagram. And the movie is on Hulu. So if you have Hulu, you can watch it there. And if you don't have Hulu, you can bum it off a friend. We all do it. And then this Wednesday, Tierney, do you want to talk about what's going on Wednesday at 5?
Yes, so Wednesday at 5, we will be meeting for the Let's Talk About Sex Connection group. We will be talking about masturbation and what the Bible has to say about that. I've gotten a few questions, so it should be an interesting conversation. So just check out the Facebook event on our TFC page and go ahead and RSVP so that you can join us at 5 o'clock on next Wednesday.
Absolutely. I'm excited. And that is one that you do have to register for. So make sure, and you can do that up until the event, even after the event is started. So there's not a huge urgency, but you do have to do it. So make sure that you go, like Tierney said, to the Facebook page to register from there. And I think that's all the events we have coming up. So yeah, you can text Disruptive to a number that I have forgotten, but you can find it on all of our stuff. It has changed recently if you want to stay connected, or you can find us at TFCATL or thefaithcommunity.org, and you will see the number you can text for all of our good updates and information. And you can stay abreast of what it is that we do here. I think that's everything. Tierney, you got anything else?
That's all I got. This has been fun.
It has been fun. Thanks for doing this and for sharing with us your knowledge.
Yes, yes.
And can't wait to see the final product whenever you're ready to stop being so bougie and actually show us what they did to your hair.
Yes, at a later time.
Indeed. All right. Take care, everybody.